Sibong Musa Makatini, followed by the GCEO, Mr. Matota Mkakwe, and then we'll have a presentation from the CFO, Ms. Yolanda van Biljon, after which we will open up the floor for questions from the media. Just in terms of protocol, we have some of our media who are joining us virtually. The link that they are using, you cannot actually speak, so if you have questions to pose, we will be looking out for your questions in writing and we'll be posing those questions to the relevant executive. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to welcome you here and ask that our chairperson of the board address us this morning. Sir.
Program Director, Ms. Nduli, Group CEO, CFO, COO, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, receive my greetings. Are we good this morning? Are we all good? I also want to greet those who are joining us via the network. I just want to start by thanking those who are able to join us today, so that they can be part of the journey that SABC has been on. In an age of this, what we call rampant disinformation, the importance of credible, independent public broadcasters cannot be overstated. An informed citizenry is fundamental to the strength of the nation's democracy and the development of its people. As South Africa grows into a global democratic player, there is an undeniable need for more trusted, quality public service content. During a time of a national crisis, the public broadcaster has cemented its place in our democracy, with a widely trusted SABC News service and SABC TV channels carrying the top entertainment shows by audience and reaching tens of millions of South Africans. The 2019-2020 financial year began in a very uncertain condition. The SABC board was still incorrect in March 2019, and the organization urgently needed a financial injection in order to implement a lasting and sustainable turnaround. A combination of unfilled vacancies and 5 resignations in the previous fiscus had left the board incorrect with only 4 non-executive directors remaining. The SABC also faced the challenge of covering the national election in May 2019 without the board being able to take decisions as the accounting authority. Thankfully, the SABC was able to overcome these challenges and turn an important corner. In April 2019, the board was freshly constituted with the addition of 8 new non-executive members, thus restoring stability to the institution. 1 month later, SABC News was widely praised for delivering balanced radio, television, and digital coverage of a national election in May 2019. By the end of the year under review, the SABC News channel led the 24-hour TV news market in the country with an improved market share performance of 42% and 40% in the free-to-air and pay TV market, respectively. This phenomenal growth has proven that our audiences want credible news they can trust from a broadcaster they can believe in. Despite years of editorial interference at the SABC, as reported by Independent Editorial Commission in August 2019, our management has gone a long way to rebuild public trust. It is also noteworthy that SABC News Online is also the second most accessed online news source in the country. In a year where education of our children and youth became uniquely challenged by the global COVID-19 pandemic, I am proud to report that the SABC played a significant role in helping preserve the 2020 school year. We not only expedited the launch of the dedicated education channel on multiple platforms, but also interrupted our normal free-to-air programming to bring Woza Africa to millions of matric households. The SABC's board central purpose is to guide the institution in fulfilling its public mandate in a self-sustaining manner and without any undue influence and interference. With 2 years left of this board's term of office, it is possible to clearly outline 2 distinct phases in restoring the SABC to long-term sustainability, namely the stabilizing phase, the sustaining phase, and the growth phase. During the stabilizing phase, which began in 2017, the board and management started a tough process of dealing with legacy governance failures by implementing the recommendations of the public protector, the Parliamentary Ad hoc Committee, the SIU report, the Auditor General, the SABC's own forensic investigation, as well as the recommendations coming out of the independent commissions into sexual harassment and political interference in the newsroom. In this regard, management has been tasked with driving tough consequence management and dealing with irregular contractual and human resources decisions. After years of turbulence and reputational damage, it was also important to fill vacancies in the top executive team. Press the reset button with key stakeholders, renegotiate contracts, and develop a lasting turnaround that included a financial injection and fundamental legislative and regulatory reforms. A vital building block in this stabilizing phase was approval by the board of a National Treasury-supported turnaround plan in September 2019. This turnaround plan followed a lengthy collaboration process with the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and the Government Technical Advisory Center, GTAC. The SABC met all government's preconditions for the recapitalization of the organization and received a 3.2 billion rand bailout in 2 tranches. 2.1 billion in October 2019 and 1.1 billion was received in March 2020. The board is very appreciative of the quality and comprehensive work by executive in achieving this funding milestone. With strong governance at its core and expertly led by the Group CEO, Madoda Mqagwe, the SABC now has a comprehensive roadmap for the future, taking into account international best practice, the demand of our public mandate obligation, and the need to transition the SABC to digital platform for all our audio and audio-video content. A significant part of the turnaround plan centers on reducing the SABC employee compensation. This includes key actions aimed at developing a new target operating model, complete with a new organizational structure and its implementation. The board is encouraged by the progress as reported by the executive management, and we expect it to be finalized within the second half of the next financial year. The appointment by the SABC board of Ian Plakis as the COO from the 1st of November 2019 marked the culmination of a stabilizing phase. Mr. Plakis joined an already strong executive director team headed by Mr. Mqagwe and Ms. Yolande van Biljon as the CFO. The SABC is now in the second phase of developing long-term sustainability, namely sustaining phase. As we expand our revenue generation base, cut costs, embed the turnaround, implement a new operating model, and fulfill our public mandate with distinction. The turnaround plan and the effort to restructure the public broadcaster are necessary, but not sufficient condition for the sustainability of the public broadcaster. The SABC operates in an extremely restrictive, anti-competitive, outdated regulatory environment which directly impact on the public broadcaster's sustainability. As the board, we continue to guide and support executive management efforts in engaging with various policymakers, regulatory body in order to achieve fundamental change to the framework. Centec transmission fees are the SABC's second biggest cost driver after salaries. And over the past 5 years, Centec has cost the SABC over 3.2 billion rand. Historical policy and contractual terms have prejudiced the SABC, negatively impacting on its finances and making it more difficult for the public broadcaster to compete with more agile, privately owned broadcasters. Reducing transmission cost is therefore a mission-critical goal of the turnaround plan, and discussions with Centec and government are continuing. The SABC board has a fiduciary duty to take decisions that will be in the long interest of the public broadcaster. It is therefore vital that the SABC is able to independently decide on which platforms will be in the SABC and our audience's best long-term interest. This will allow the public broadcaster to control its own destiny into the future. The public broadcaster is committed to playing a more central leadership role in ensuring digital migration and full analog switch off expeditiously. After years of underinvestment, the SABC has lagged behind on the technology side. The SABC board has therefore approved an over-the-top streaming strategy with the short-term goal that the SABC will leverage online and mobile platform to allow customers to access all SABC content and services anywhere, anytime, and on any device. To this end, an RFI was issued in October 2020. But it is the creation of exciting, compelling content that is the key part of any broadcasting and media business. And by necessity, it is the cornerstone of SABC's turnaround plan. The SABC must create, commission, license relevant content that is in the public interest, entertaining and relevant to all audiences, our audiences. In the creation and distribution of this content, we must be guided by strong policy. Therefore, the approval by the SABC board of the editorial policy in February 2020 was a bright landmark for the public broadcaster after the culmination of an extensive public consultation process. The editorial policy, which were only launched in August 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, now apply to all programming output by the public broadcaster. They deal extensively with news and editorial content, but also include policy and guidelines for digital media platforms, language, local content, violence, children's content, religious and educational programming, and set out the various complaint procedures available to the public. The policies will be enforced and binding to our board, management, employees, and will also guide our stakeholders as to what is expected from the SABC. By adopting these editorial policies, which were last amended in 2004, 16 years back, we have set ourselves the highest editorial standards, incorporating the values and principles of our Constitution and requirements of the law and the expectations of our audiences. As a public broadcaster, the SABC has a duty to create a more youth-oriented programming and more fully reflect the lives and interests of 28.8% of South Africa's population that are young, under the age of under 15 years of age. This means creating compelling programming for our children and youth, and how to support and create opportunities in a difficult economy. Youth unemployment has been identified as one of our biggest challenges facing our society, and the SABC wants to play its part, working with all stakeholders, including independent producers, government, editorial, educational institutions, and educational institutions. Our children and the youth of this country must find content that educates, inform, entertain across television, radio, and digital platform. The growth phase. The growth phase is the third phase of our journey, should be our focus for the last 2 years of this board's term, which ends in October 2022. We remain confident that the management team focus on new commercial partnership and a sustainable cost structure will make significant difference, notwithstanding the severe impact of COVID-19 pandemic, which grabbed South Africa and the world as the financial year drew to a closure. The impact of the pandemic will be fully reported on in 2020-2021 financial year. But on behalf of the board, I want to thank the SABC management for calmly guiding us through this national crisis. In particular, our immense gratitude goes to all employees, frontline staff, and including all journalists and crew who went beyond the call of duty in the public interest. There is certainly light at the end of the tunnel. The SABC will meet its target of becoming financially sustainable and grow if, one, we bring about significant changes in the regulatory and legislative framework. We commission and produce exciting and compelling content. We create revenue through better monetization of our content and through having commercial partners. We negotiate a reduction in signal distribution cost and reduce staff cost as part of a fit-for-purpose structure. Being bold and decisive in implementing the approved turnaround strategy is one of our critical success factors. Clarity of roles and holding each other accountable at all levels is of paramount importance. Our resolve as a board to see the SABC achieve financial sustainability is unwavering, and we stand ready to take the necessary decisions, no matter how difficult or unpopular, to achieve the turnaround of this organization, which SABC needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can clap, it's fine. Thank you very much, Chairperson, for succinctly actually highlighting the various phases, making it clearer for us to understand exactly where we're at as a corporation and the growth of the corporation and its sustainability. I'm now going to call on our GCEO, Mr. Madoda Mxakwe, to address us. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My role here is simply to give an overview of the annual report, and Yolandi is going to get into the granular details. I think from the onset, let me state that as the SABC, we exist solely to fulfill our constitutionally driven public mandate, which is to inform, entertain, and educate the millions of South Africans. And we carry a burden of an unfunded mandate. Everybody knows that 85% of our revenue is generated from selling inventory and airtime through our various platforms, traditional media platforms, including digital. And it's therefore important that we instill fundamental business principles in the organization so that we can be able to fulfill the public mandate that is not funded. So what you'll see detailed in the annual report is that the SABC continues to deliver on its extensive public mandate, despite all of the challenging and difficult conditions that we're confronted with. The previous fiscal was a very difficult one for the SABC, but we've begun to also see positive green shoots in as far as the objective of implementing the turnaround plan is concerned. We faced another difficult year, and this was further compounded by depressed economic activities that affected our revenue generation activities. Despite this, I can assure the public that the building blocks to stabilize the SABC are now in place, and we want to ensure that we can have a financially sustainable organization that will be able to deliver on the public mandate. Yolandi will share more details, but as at the end of March 2020, we reported a net loss of 511 million. This is a 6% decline compared to the previous year. If you recall, the previous year we're at 444 net losses. But very importantly, this is 20% better performance against our annual budget for the previous fiscal. And I do think that it's important to highlight, because an organization that is going through a turnaround phase behaves differently. We've moved in 2017 where we had net losses of 1.2 billion. We journeyed into the 444, and now we are at 511 million. Yes, it's a decline, but it's 20% better than the performance against budget. In a very challenging economic environment, our total revenue declined by 12% year on year to 5.7 billion. And this decline is largely attributed to a decrease in advertising spend across the industry, but also the delay in finalizing some of the commercial partnerships for the SABC on digital platforms. I've always said this, a lot of global and local competitors have had an upper hand when it comes to technology and talent acquisition, because they've invested heavily in terms of content. And as the SABC, you may have seen, we're having a lot of commercial partnerships with various players, because audiences are consuming content differently. As a result, we also need to be in that space, particularly from a revenue generation point of view. To give you a sense, an organization that used to spend 100 million with the SABC annually 2 years ago, they no longer want to just invest that 100 million in our ordinary traditional media platforms. They want at least 20 to 30% of that to be in digital. Hence, we're working very hard to be in those platforms. TV licenses, the revenue declined there by about 18% year on year to 791. And this is largely due to the delayed use of the debt collection agencies. As you know, we have various streams when it comes to collecting TV license fees. But I do need to point out that as part of the overall policy review, we've submitted a final proposal to the shareholder on the future collection of a public broadcasting levy. And for us, this is also very linked to the need to look at the unfunded public mandate, which is part of the activities that we are involved in. I think where we really did well, because year on year we've been focused on reducing operational expenses. We've actually done this quite successfully. For the previous fiscal, Yolandi will share, we've reduced by 1.8 billion, which is quite commendable under the conditions that we're operating under. The settlement of long outstanding creditors was also key. We reduced trade and other payables by nearly 50%, with creditor payment days closing the year at 51 days. Just to give you a sense, as at the end of 31st March 2019, the creditor payment days were standing at 143 days, which is really a significant improvement from where we were in the previous fiscal. The cash on hand for the SABC as at 31st March 2020 was at 2.1 billion, and this is a marked improvement compared to the 73 million which we had at the end of 31st March 2019. During the year under review, the SABC continues its journey to improve internal controls and ensure that governance is restored in the organization. The corporation was once again encouraged by the decline in year-to-year irregular expenditure by about 40%, amounting to 202 million, compared to the 336 million for the year that ended on the 31st of March 2019. Year on year, fruitless expenditure has decreased by 87%, and that equates to 27 million rands. That 26 million that we incurred from interest and penalties due to late payments caused by cash flow constraints within the organization. I think very importantly, from an audit opinion point of view, we continue to see improvements. You will recall in 2017, we were at the what is called disclaimer from an audit opinion. We've really moved. We now registered an audit opinion that is qualified with findings. It is not where we want to be, but it's significantly better than where we were. And the idea is to ensure that we can get a clean audit. Hence, governance and adhering to it is a key pillar of the organization. We continue to implement our turnaround plan with purpose and commitment. Whilst the pandemic will have a significant impact on our financial sustainability in the short term, we remain confident that we're on track to deliver on our objectives. In this regard, there's huge focus on emerging revenue generation opportunities. We know that the dependence on our classic revenue is not working. We are now transitioning to ensure that we can get more ad spend on digital platforms. Very key for us is the need to invest in compelling content so that we can increase audience ratings, which is correlated to the need to better pricing, investing behind our brands, making sure that there's more marketing initiatives as a result to create value when we take our brands and products to the industry. The migration to digital platform is key of our strategy, and we're driving this quite aggressively. The implementation of the new operating model, which talks directly to the need to do things differently. And very lastly, as Chair spoke about this, to deal with the major cost drivers, because the SABC cannot be sustainable if we do not deal with those. During the year under review, and despite all of the severe liquidity challenges we faced, we performed extremely well in meeting content obligations for national building as well as for social cohesion. We acquired and scheduled content that reflects the South African story on both television as well as the radio platforms. The SABC's radio stations complied with the ICASA regulations. Similarly, all of our free-to-air television channels exceeded the South African content requirements. In conclusion, the SABC has taken bold and decisive steps in implementing our turnaround plans. Notwithstanding difficult economic conditions, the South African Broadcasting Corporation remains on track to achieve financial sustainability. And we're really doing this in order to ensure that we fulfill our public mandate. I've said that in the past, this is an 84-year-old organization. It's an institution that South Africans treasure dearly, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we fortify and build it for the next generation so that it can exist for the next 84 years. Thank you very much. I would like now to hand over to Gugu.
Thank you very much, GCO. Members of the media, colleagues, I think we can definitely see that there is progress being made at the national broadcaster. The stabilization that chairperson alluded to, is starting to yield results in terms of going from disclaimer to audit opinion. In terms of audit opinion to qualified, we are starting to see a reduction in audit findings, as the GCO has highlighted, and of course an increased investment in content, which is exactly what we are about. As the broadcaster, we must have compelling content, and of course starting to rapidly move towards digitization. I would like now to hand over to our CFO to delve into the detail of the financials. Over to you.
Are we going to put the presentation up? Thank you very much, Program Director. Good afternoon, my board chair, members of the media, and colleagues that are listening in. It is my great pleasure today to share with you some of the milestones and the challenges in our financial journey, the third year that I'm presenting it. Oh gosh, when I moved it, yeah, okay. Is it on presentation mode? Okay, I hope you can hear me. I get a bad network notification here. So yeah, as I was saying, sorry, leaflet. Can I mute them? I can hear them talk there.
Could you kindly mute colleagues online?
Okay. Oh, can I carry on? Yeah, all right. You know, this is now what happens when you're the third one that speaks. Everybody else have already stolen your messages, and you get interrupted when you want to make this wow opening statement. But I can still hear them talk there.
Colleagues, could you kindly mute your mics?
Must we do it here?
Not sure. Can you kindly assist? Oh, here we are. Okay. Here we are.
Right. I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm going to go straight into the granular details that the CEO always expects me to talk about when I have made a high-level presentation. So I'm going to try and do a good recovery at this point in time. Not to repeat what he said, what you see in front of you is a graphical presentation and the numbers now in pictures as well, where you can see the impact of our performance. Yes, it was 20% less than what we expected on an earnings before interest and tax level. You can see the 444 million that has increased to 534. And the majority reason for that is unfortunately the impact of our revenue initiatives and the decline in the economic conditions that he's already touched on as well. We were, however, able to recover quite a bit of that in the form of a combination of extremely aggressive cost-saving, austerity measures, but unfortunately a component of that also resulted in us having to apply what I call cash conservation. To be able to meet our obligations, unfortunately, we had to make some tough decisions, and there are really just a few areas where we can do that in, and I'll talk you through that in a second. The positive message is, however, that against our budget, the performance was much better. albeit not what we would call very good performance. And yes, our turnaround strategy is more or less a year down the line, and we therefore have another 2 years or so that we have to put real effort in to ensure that the organization return to financial sustainability. A few notable messages. We do continue to spend more than what we earn. For every R1 that we earn, we are spending R1.10. Clearly, that does not make sense, and it is also even a little bit worse than in the year before. And you're going to see more slides, so don't worry too much about the detail. Our main cost drivers continue to be the payroll, our content investment, and then our signal and distribution costs. And operational costs, but it's made out of 100 of little items, and that is particularly one where we've been able to make some significant inroads by just changing the way the organization engages with its cost base. Important to note is that our public commercial services made a small profit in the past financial year, and public broadcasting services did make a loss. It is to be expected, but it is not the ideal ratio. You would want to be more sustainable on the commercial side. At the bottom, if I can minimize this or move it, there you go. You can see the progression in our financial performance. The CEO referred to the 1.1 billion. We're currently talking about 533 at the operational loss level. Unfortunately, like with every other organization in the world, practically, COVID and the related implications have wreaked havoc in our planning for the year, and we are at this point forecasting that significant loss. So it is resulting in our return to financial sustainability that will be delayed possibly by 10 to 12 months, but we do have very good initiatives in place that we hope will still see us be there in about the 2023 year. Now, this is a very important slide. In this slide, I try to illustrate true operational performance. So what we do in accountant speak, we normalize the financial performance and we remove once-off items. Now, if you look at the financial year ended the 31st of March 2019, you can see the 546 that was reported in the previous slide, the 443. If, however, you take out the once-off items, particularly a provision that was reversed in that financial year, true operational performance will amount to 585 million rand. If you perform the same activity in the current financial year that we are here to celebrate today, that adjusted loss comes to 475 million rand. So literally 110 million rand better operational performance when you compare like for like. A very good message, and that we are real gives us reason to celebrate, and therefore you can also see again, if you now look at this trend at the bottom there, you can see how the 634 will change to 585, will change to 473, and then there's this financial year. So again, the positive story that we are here to tell you about. Revenue, not so much a good story, but we do manage to not only mitigate the consequences of the reduced revenue that we generate by a combination of activities, but we also have very exciting opportunities ongoing even in this financial year. So you can see the reducing trend from 2018 to 2019. The biggest bar, obviously, is our advertising classic revenue. CEO has touched on the main reasons for that. In addition to what he's indicated, the fact that we've been unable to invest in compelling content up until about actually this financial year, you do see the impact thereof in the ability to not only attract your audiences, but more so even to then generate the revenue because you're attracting your advertisers. Important to note, he also reflected briefly on TV licenses. The same trend you see, it's the small green bar, the 941, 968, and 791. Definitely not the kind of picture that we would ideally be reporting. Important to note is we invoice about 3 billion rand per annum. We collect about a billion rand or 800 million then in this specific financial year. So we do have an evasion rate of between 70 and 80%, and that clearly is not a sustainable situation, and especially if you compare that then also with the cost of our unfunded mandate. Also here, I briefly reflected on the first slide on the cost to income. Here you can see the progression over the past 3 years, and there's specifically the 110% that I referred to. We did a very one-dimensional content return on investment calculation. It is really just our program film and sports rights line item on the income statement compared with the revenue that we generated, and therefore we report that content ROI. Collection costs on television license, you can see there 13%, 12%, and 4% over the various years. And that, I think, would be the main messages on revenue. If I were to go down to expenditure, that'll be it. On expenditure, I reflected on the main cost drivers in this case. If I look at a few other interesting ones, I did say that we were able to mitigate the 23% underperformance against our budget and 12% underperformance against the past year in the form of a number of cost containment, cash conservation, delay activities. The fact that we received the bailout in the middle of the year impacted on our ability to, for example, recover on repairs and maintenance, and these kind of things, and it also impacted on our program strategy, which is usually developed this time for the year for the next financial year. So we weren't able to, when we received the bailout in October last year, necessarily immediately start acquiring content. There's been a lot of planning going on to ensure that the bailout money is spent in the most prudent way, in a manner that will see return on investment continuously going forward. A few other interesting items on this specific slide would be the marketing and marketing cost. You can barely see it, which is the problem. A part of the reason why we're unable to effectively generate audiences to be able to sell is the fact that we have not been able to market. The result of that is that we are not able to get our message out there, and therefore our advertisers are also not aware of what we can offer. So we have been able to budget quite significantly for marketing, but each time that you struggle with cash, the consequence is that you are not able to necessarily invest in one of those items. We have generated savings that was specifically targeted and not due to cash conservation. These amounted to about 325 million rand and was largely focused in your operational costs, the bad costs as I call them, which would be things like professional and consulting fees. You see operational costs there, you see a few other cost items. So it's in those cost line items that we have really tried to make inroads. The line item professional and consulting fees always attract a lot of attention. I think important to note is that not only did we spend less than what we did in the previous financial year, but we also spent significantly less than what that was budgeted. So that to me is always a sign that we are not investing in things that are bad costs. The other cost drivers, payroll and signal and distribution costs, have remained mostly flat, and there's been other information shared around that topic already. This would be the statement of financial position. Main positive message here is the 303.2 billion rand that was received in 2 tranches and have put the organization in a significantly better liquidity and solvency position. We did touch on debtors' days and creditors' days earlier in the presentation. And it is now to ensure that that money is really invested in a manner that will set us up for a positive future. Going concern was clearly a conversation that was very difficult with the AG until the receipt or confirmation of the bailout, and we have therefore been able to make positive strides there. If you look at the topic of financial misconduct, Firstly, yes, there is a balance as at the end of this financial year that amounts to 5.4 billion rand. This balance have been accruing over a period of nearly 9-10 years. The majority of it was identified in an activity in the 2016 year, if I'm not mistaken, and it therefore predates that era. So you will see there are items in this balance that comes from 2011. We have, however, started monitoring it in terms of in-year performance, and I try to console myself that we are making the right changes and starting to change the behavior in the organization, because you see the reduction, not only in instances, but you see the reduction in the rand value. Important to note, in that 202 million rand that was the balance of in-year incurred irregular expenditure, of the top 10 items, which makes up the majority of that amount, 61% of that is of past year's transgression. So that to me is also a sign that we are starting to in-year change the behavior. But the whole organization in its engagement with the value chain around supply chain is struggling. We inherited an organization that did not have updated policies, did not know the policies it had, and certainly was not used to planning. It has been painful, but we have slowly but surely started to change the behavior in this respect. As much as there is still a lot of work to be done in the area. And we have involved the whole of business, because supply chain, the department itself and the activities in the department, which is typically where you find your irregular expenditure, is actually a business activity. So you got to start with the process owner to understand that person understands the policies, the supply chain system, to be able to ensure that we don't get even to incurring irregular expenditure. What was the AG's challenge this specific financial year is about the completeness of the register. We have put in place a number of measures over time. Unfortunately, it was very much a manual activity until about 18 months ago, literally an Excel spreadsheet that was maintained. In the course of the year, we have embedded a certain mechanism in our SAP financial system, and therefore we already worked towards a more complete register. However, it was only towards the second part of the year that this was possible. So if the AG says they're concerned about the completeness, it is because we, at the time in this financial year, for all 12 months, were not able to test 100% of the population of the activities done in supply chain and payments. Since then, the initiatives, one of them even in this financial year, allows us to test approximately probably 80 to 90% of, I think you're looking at 10,000 transactions per month that we are now able to test over a 12-month period to work towards that completeness activity. But what you need to do with irregular expenditure is get to the prevention part. You don't even want to talk about detection. That would be then your next activity, but you want to prevent it. And it's in this respect that there are a host of activities ongoing. The supply chain department has its challenges. It was the topic of a lot of focus with SCOPA meetings in recent months. It is a theme throughout the audit report, if you've read that. So we understand that there's a lot of work to be done. And there are initiatives, intervention plans, there's engagement with business, treasury, etc., to help us get to grips of what needs to happen as far as this topic is concerned. So as much as we are confident we're on the right track, there is certainly no doubt that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Fruitless and wasteful, a little bit of a different conversation. Firstly, it is literally that, fruitless and wasteful. And if your financial situation is tenuous, then you do not want to waste money. And this is what this topic is about. The positive thing in this specific financial year, 26 of the 27 million rand is interest that we incurred because we couldn't pay our suppliers in time. And therefore, it also speaks specifically to the first 6 months in the financial year. So since then, obviously, that is no longer a challenge. It's then to deal with the reasons for the 1 million or so that is in there. For interest's sake, the significant balance that's reported for the previous financial year was as a result of sports rights, that when the reconciliations were done for a 5-year period, we realized we paid for rights that we never got the games for, and then you have to impair it. And the consequences is really money lost, as in this case. Has then been the case. So you do not want to have fruitless and wasteful to explain. With irregular expenditure, maybe a final note before I move on, is that we understand that there could be money lost here as well, but for 98% of the amount that is flagged as irregular, goods and services were received. But what can happen is that when you, through whatever reason, award to the wrong service provider and you end up paying more, then that amount that you should have been paying less when you award it to the right service provider, that is fruitless and wasteful. And for that, you need to proceed with recoveries, in fact. Final comment related to this and on the AG report, which you'll see shortly, is the topic of consequence management. Now, the organization has a zero tolerance as far as the implementation of consequence management is concerned. We have acted consistently and without fear in implementing the consequence management required in all the reports that the organization have had to deal with in the past 5 or 6 years. The one we struggle with is financial misconduct specifically. It is a complicated topic to be able to identify the true perpetrator, if you will, and then to ensure that there's consistent action taken. And again, numerous initiatives are ongoing with the hope that we will be able to have a consistent and fair approach to the topic, and we then hope that we will also be able to address the AG comments as far as that topic is concerned. This slide really just gives you a sense of the underlying themes in financial misconduct. I'm not going to stop there. This again shows our progressive journey towards a strong and sustainable, proud public broadcaster. There was references to the disclaimer audit opinion in the 2018 year. Main contributor there, apart from going concern, were the other few themes. Today, we report on the financial statements one area that leads to the qualification only, and that's the topic of irregular expenditure. The compliance item that you see, the cross in that bar under the 2020 column, again, it relates to consequence manage. I've elaborated quite a bit on that, and I hope it gives you confidence that we not only understand what our problem is, but that there are activities in place to address that. For the CFO, it is always a positive message if audit findings are reducing. I joke about it, but maybe it's really not a joke made in jest. Even if the audit report has less pages than the previous years, I'm already grateful. The audit report that we got in the 2018 year had over 600 pages. This year we were on about 400 or so. Findings have improved, the material ones, from 28 to 23. You can imagine a lot of it would have been irregular expenditure and supply chain related, and the immaterial ones have actually shown a nice positive movement. For the first time, the organization was part of the Public Audit Act activities around material irregularities, a very serious theme in the accounting and auditing world with very serious consequences. We had 2 notifications. Left a lot of us with little sleep for a long time. The one notification, our actions that was taken and that's been committed to were accepted by the AG, and they will monitor while we keep on executing. And with respect to the second one, it was eventually agreed that it was in fact not a material irregularity, but it was an irregular expenditure. So that for the CFO and the finance fraternity, it was a great relief because we were quite anxious about being a first-timer in this theme. This graph to me, or a slide to me, speaks a lot to what the chairperson said about stabilizing, sustaining, and then growing. The colors are purposeful. It is not me sitting in my office coming up with a color progression. The themes, firstly, is derived from what is deemed internal control practices, and in the topic reading matter study field, you will find them. And the auditors, the AG's opinion on what they measure when they track leadership, governance, and financial performance. So what I did is I took the underlying themes in each of this, and I reflected on our journey in this topic over the years. So indeed, a number of reds were visible in 2018. Today, you can see how we've started moving into yellow in the 2019 year. We now even report some greens in the 2020 year. So it's really encouraging to myself, the team and the organization that there seems to be movement in the right direction. But we have no illusions that there is still work to be done. And I think the highlights there reflects on some of those activities. Our action plan towards an improved audit outcome would definitely be to do what I've indicated before with respect to financial misconduct and irregular expenditure particular. If we're able to address the concerns raised around that theme in the audit report, we can maybe have a qualified audit report only next year with no findings. And in the last year of the reign of this board, we might even be able to report a clean audit. It will certainly be the culmination of years of effort and lots of pain and suffering and lots of support from everybody in and outside the organization and the hard work to be able to get there. It is to a very significant extent connected to our financial sustainability, and the chairperson indicated there are a few things that's outside of our control, outside of the organization, that will impact on us. And we are working closely with the interested parties, the stakeholders, the shareholders in this respect to bring this organization to the proud broadcaster we know it can be. Going concern assumptions, not going to stop a lot of here. It really just speaks.
Of course, we're just going to come out of that results announcement then by the SABC.
From the signature of the financial statements. This year it was further delayed, and we were therefore even checking as far as September next year. And it is going to be tough, but we have good plans in place, and we will certainly try our best to achieve these things. We have reached a point where we can no longer save ourselves out of trouble. We really have cut the fat in many ways out of the organization. We therefore I really need to face the fact that it's about revenue generation. We have the tools to do it. We have the people who's capable of doing it. We have the properties that can do that for us. So I think it would be good to say that watch the space. It is going to get interesting. And at that note, I will hand back to the program director. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CFO, for a detailed account of our financial position. Before we open up to questions on the floor, I'd like to invite our COO, to address us on our digitization progress. Over to you, COO.
Good afternoon to our chair, to the media, and to my colleagues. So, very key to the SABC's transformation is collaboration and partnerships. And you would have seen that last week we concluded a very significant partnership with Telkom. With that, we introduced streaming services for SABC TV. The advantage of that we have for our organization is without any cost, we have two additional revenue drivers. One, in the form of a carriage license, and two, we can now play in the advertising space in streaming services. In the new year, you'll see many more of these partnerships and collaboration as we transform the organization. One of the very key partners is our audience out there. And we thank the 30% who have been very loyal in paying their TV licenses. And for the 70% that haven't, we thank you in advance for changing your mind to support us. Here's the three things that you're going to be contributing to immediately. One, protect future jobs within the SABC. Two, enable us to bring the compelling content that you deserve. And 3, to grow the local industry who was severely impacted through COVID. The SABC wants to double its spend on local content, and we can only do that through your partnerships and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, COO. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I would like to actually open the floor up to questions. We have a roaming mic, so if you could please just indicate with your hand up, and we will pose the questions to the relevant executives. For those that are online, please feel free to post your questions, and we will read those questions out loud.
My name is Dina Nzalova from City Press. My first question is, how much money did the SABC spend on outside consultants in the past financial year? And what is the total value of all the contracts that were awarded through deviation from normal procurement processes?
Are there any further questions from the floor? Yep, we can please respond to that question.
Okay, maybe I'll add one more question to that. Litigation issues. How much money has the SAB spent on legal cases and litigation cases? Thank you.
Over to you, CFO.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you for the question. Professional and consulting fees was 78 million rand for the year. Included in there would be everything from the Auditor General to actuarial services to other consulting fees in our technical environment, as well as legal fees. Legal fees amounted to about 27 million of that. And I think there's a lot said about that topic as well already. With respect to the amount spent on deviations and expansions, I cannot tell you the amount simply because I don't know it. It's not that it's a secret, because we looked at the instances in recent times, and I just haven't added them up. That's as simple as that. Why not? Have I not added it up? I just haven't made the effort right now, but I will do it. It's just not a number I have at the tip of my finger.
Thank you. If I can just give a bit of context to the issue of legal fees, because it's something that is always talked about. You must recall that we inherited an organization that was literally rendered and hollowed out and rendered dysfunctional. There were a lot of reports that we have had to deal with. There was the recommendation of the Public Protector report, for example, the reports from the ad hoc committee in Parliament. There were a lot of forensic investigations that were done. Most of these cases were left unattended. Just to give you a sense, from April 2018 to date, we have had to deal with over 250 disciplinary cases. There were also cases that involved the SIU. There were also cases where we had to ensure we recoup monies based on the malfeasance and corruption that took place. So litigation by its own nature is expensive and time-consuming. And as the SABC, we have a duty to ensure we do what is right for the organization. But what we've done, and for me this is very encouraging, if you look at this current fiscal, we're standing at about 25% from a budget point of view towards legal costs. And year to date, we've spent just over 7 million. If you compare this with the previous fiscal where there was 37 million, it does show that the trend is going downward. But we cannot ignore these cases because it has to do with our fiduciary duty as the management team. But at the same time, as I say, we have now put in place measures to ensure that we can reduce legal costs. But essentially, this is as a result of some of the legacy issues that we need to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, GCEO. Any further questions from the floor? Colleagues online, can we please have any questions that you wish to pose? Oh, okay, sure.
Thank you very much, Program Director. So just to clarify, also in the course of the scope of conversations, we looked at the number of times or the number of deviations and expansions. The RAND value, you could misconstrue it, similar to what you do when you looked at irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. But I do have the number now. The deviations for the past financial year in total amounted to 51 million, and there were apparently about 30 of them. Now, do bear in mind that this is in the context of procurement of probably capital of about 200 million, plus the other expenditure, which would be another 3 billion or so. For expansions, expansions again, it amounts to 65 million, and there were about 20 instances. But again, I would caution against not looking at it in the context of focusing on the RAND value and not on the instances. And deviations and expansions are mechanisms permitted in law. They are just not supposed to be normal activities. They're supposed to be for extraordinary circumstances.
Just the last follow-up question. Can you give us some of the examples in instances where the SABC has had to deviate? And what kind of contracts are we talking?
Deviations would be when we, for example, have only specific service providers that can render specific services. That would be the one I understand quite a bit, and it's unique to our business, is broadcast-specific software. There are only a handful of service providers in the country and sometimes even in the world that are able to render those services. You also sit with what we call perpetual licenses versus subscription licenses. So a perpetual license is a license that you buy, you own it. It's like a table and a chair. It's on my balance sheet and it gets amortized. But you need to pay for maintenance of that, maintenance and support, an accepted concept in the IT environment. But if there's just one service provider that supplies the license, then and he's the only one who provides the maintenance and support, then that would be a deviation. Some of these big suppliers, and they're literally all the deviations, I think almost 80%, 90% of them are unique broadcast-specific software. Some of these service providers these days have resellers, but it's a handful of them only. So again, you are then limited to where, at least you now have 4 or 5 that you can at least do price comparisons, etc. But we do have instances where there's literally one in the world, and it's broadcast services and software that's used by all the big broadcasters that you know. I hope that gives you a good sense.
Thank you very much, CFO. Follow-up questions or any new questions, colleagues? Nothing from our online media at this stage? Okay, colleagues, all of the annual reports, all of the sticks that you'll be receiving will have the annual report on there, as well as the press release, but the annual report will also be on sabc.co.za. If you have any further questions, I know that the team actually are availing the CFO for more detailed interviews, which you will be afforded. Since there are no further questions, I think that we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much for coming, and we have some hospitality outside for you after this. Thank you very much.